10:30, and the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Licensing and Regulatory Affairs and Insurance and Financial Services will come to order. Mr. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Chair Skaggs. Here. Representatives Brixey.
Yes.
Morse.
Here.
Artis.
Here.
McKinney.
Here.
Shooty. Here. Horton.
Here.
And DeBoer.
Here.
Chairman and all members are present. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Rep. Morse moves to excuse absent members. There aren't any absent members, so that's an easy one to pass. Let's move on. Let's say Rep. Morse moves to approve the minutes for the March 5th meeting. How does that sound? Great job. Without objection, so ordered. Welcome, subcommittee members. Today we are hearing from the Michigan Public Service Commission. Commissioner Scripps is here. And others, and we are awaiting your testimony. So come on up, and we are eager to hear your presentation.
Chairman Skaggs, Vice Chair Brixey, Vice Chair Shooty, and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to present the Public Service Commission's budget request for fiscal year 2025. I also wanted to introduce the two individuals that I have with me today. Rika Holly-Velker is our legislative liaison, is a great point of contact for you if you have constituent issues or other issues. It has background in the legislature, is a great person to work with. And Lucy Clay is participating in our Commissioner Job Shadow program. She's in our compliance and investigations section, so she is one of our frontline folks who hears from customers when they've got inquiries or complaints, and is participating today with a legislative interest in this commission or this subcommittee meeting here as well. In terms of the commission, there are 3 members of the commission. All of us are appointed for staggered 6-year terms, subject to the advice and consent of the Senate. Commissioner Catherine Paratic joined in January of 2021. I have been on the commission since February of 2019, so just over 5 years. And Commissioner Alessandra Carrion joined last summer, so there's been a change since I was last here with all of you, with Commissioner Tremaine Phillips leaving the commission for a role in the private sector, and Commissioner Carrion hitting the ground running as our newest member of the commission. We also are supported and work with approximately 190 professionals with a broad background in engineering, accounting, auditing, law, customer service, a full range of skill sets. And our staff, and this is something that I don't think I even fully appreciated when I joined the commission, actually operates independently from the commission in our cases. So they bring their impartial expertise into our proceedings and provide us with a solid base of evidence on which to make our decisions. But that independence of the staff is something that's core to the culture of the commission, and I think results in a stronger evidentiary record and ultimately stronger decisions. Our mission is to serve the public by ensuring safe, reliable, and accessible energy and telecommunications services at reasonable rates. I like to think of this as sort of 3 individual pieces, and it starts, and our whole reason for being is to serve the public, and that's very important, and so it is literally the first 4 words in our mission statement. We do that by ensuring safe, reliable, and accessible energy and telecommunications services, so those are the industries over which we have oversight, and those core principles of safety, reliability, and accessibility guide our work. And of course, the rates need to be reasonable as well. And so those are some of the frontline things that we think about as we do our work in each proceeding and every day. The way we do that is, and these are some of our major functions, I won't go into detail on each of these, but ensuring system reliability, this shows up in a whole range of our efforts, everything from evaluating proposed investments, the updated service quality rules and technical standards last year, better tying utility financial performance with the level of outages, a resilience technical conference, first of its kind independent audit into the utilities distribution systems. This focus on system reliability is one of our leading priorities, and for good reason. Setting just and reasonable rates, this is sort of the bread and butter of the commission. We do this through our rate case proceedings. These are bound statutorily to be adjudicated within 10 months, which is a heavy lift, particularly as the range of issues, the number of intervening parties, and other things make them longer and more complex as we go. Energy assurance and planning is largely done through the integrated resource planning and capacity demonstration process that was established in 2016, but looking at long-term resource adequacy on the system. We also do a fair amount of licensing and fostering of competitive markets, particularly with the alternative electric suppliers that participate in the choice program, alternative gas suppliers, and telecommunications providers. Facility siting and need determination. Even before the changes in the recent legislation, we've long had oversight over pipelines for natural gas, for petroleum and hazardous liquids. In 2014, the legislature gave us authority over the siting of carbon dioxide pipelines. In 1990, we took on responsibility for siting of high voltage electric transmission lines. So this facility siting and need determination is also central to our work. Public safety and infrastructure oversight, this is both on the gas and electric side, but our gas team in particular, and the gas safety program that they oversee is recognized as one of the best in the country. It's an important part of keeping our communities safe, and they're laser focused on that. And then consumer assistance and protection, this is something that is how we interface with the public that we serve, including on the assistance side, where we're responsible for and have a role in administering the MEEP program, the Michigan Energy Assurance Program, that is funded by ratepayers each year to the tune of $50 million. I wanted to give a quick update on some of our 2023 priorities. Some of these I already spoke about in the last slide, but when I was here last year, we talked about grid reliability and resilience concerns. We were in the middle of a series of outages, some extended outages for a week or more. I'm happy that we're not in that place today, sleeping a little better at night, and I know your constituents are as well. But that work continues with some of the things that I mentioned earlier. On resource adequacy, working within the constructs of the regional transmission organizations, MISO for most of the state and PJM in the southwest corner of the Lower Peninsula, around their frameworks, as well as what we do through our IRPs and capacity demonstrations. Continued work around offsetting the costs for some of this infrastructure by encouraging and supporting utility applications for funding under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. There is a fair amount of federal funding available, and our utilities and others have been fairly aggressive in going after that and offsetting the costs that would otherwise be borne by their customers. We concluded the My Power Grid initiative, although a fair amount of work continues and will continue to be ongoing, but that was an initiative that we launched in the fall of 2019. We're nearing completion of the nuclear feasibility study that was directed to the Commission in 2022, and we will have our final report not later than April 15th of this year. We also delivered the grid integration study report that was directed to us by Senate Resolution 143 of 2020, and we delivered that to the legislature last June. We have a number of work groups focused on customer affordability and outreach, a low-income energy policy board, an energy accessibility and EAAC, accessibility and affordability work group, our long-term low-income energy waste reduction work group, so a fair amount of work around customer affordability and outreach. And then an active caseload. So we issued 382 orders in 2023 that included the completion of the Enbridge Act 16 Read the Record case, issued 5 rate case orders, including I think our 2 longest in Commission history, 2 IRP orders, and ultimately oversaw 9,400 filings and comments in our case dockets. So an active 2023. The other thing I wanted to flag was we issued $50 million in grants. This was 2 tranches of funding approved and appropriated by the legislature for a low-carbon grant program. And we ultimately sort of reviewed 24 proposals totaling more than $176 million and made our decision last June to grant 15 projects, including 6 planning grants and 9 infrastructure grants. And that ranges everything from an EV charging infrastructure project at the Kalamazoo Nature Center, a planning grant to consider carbon capture and sequestration at Midland Cogeneration Venture, a natural gas expansion project in Wexford County, a renewable natural gas project at a Centennial Farm in Kent County, a new digester at the wastewater treatment plant in Genesee County, and grid-scale solar and storage projects being developed by the Lansing Board of Water and Light, among a number of others. So this is something that touched almost every corner of the state of Michigan, and we're excited to see those projects move forward. Looking at what we're up to in 2024, it's another ongoing year. The focus on, almost obsessive focus on improving reliability continues to be sort of number one. Ensuring resource adequacy as the energy transition continues is also a significant part of our work. Another year of significant casework. We actually expect more rate cases to be filed this year than we've seen in the last several years. I've been working with the utilities to try and space those out for our staff to be able to fully evaluate those. And I appreciate the flexibility and coordination that we've been able to work through on some of those things to make sure that we're not having to issue all of those orders on the same day with the 10-month statutory deadline. And then continued focus on some of the federal funding opportunities. I also wanted to flag that we also were provided $21.3 million by the legislature for a renewable energy and electrification grant program. So this is a pivot from the former low carbon grant program. We also launched a community outreach, education, and engagement effort, and obviously have a fair amount of work to do in implementing the 2023 energy legislation as well. And I'll speak to each of these in some level of detail. On improving reliability, again, we issued a first-of-its-kind audit, independent audit for both consumers and DTE Electric's distribution systems. We expect that final audit report in the summer of this year, and look forward to digging in. We've had some good conversations with the auditors. They've been asking a lot of questions of both consumers and DTE. And then also we're in the process of updating our reliability website to publicly track utility reliability performance on a more granular level. This is sort of akin to sunshine being the disinfectant and wanting to take the information that we're getting from the utilities with some of our increased reporting requirements and share them broadly so that everybody has the opportunity to look at almost a circuit-by-circuit level at the overall level of reliability performance and then zoom in to reliability performance in their neighborhood. So it's something that will be on our website within the next couple of days, and we're excited to share that more publicly. We'll announce that with a press release as well. In terms of the Renewable Energy and Electrification Grant Program, we, again, $21.3 million in funding from the legislature. The application deadline for proposals was February 21st. I'm pleased to say that we have a lot. So we have 52 proposals totaling $147 million in funding for that $21.3 million that's available. Under the statutory framework that governs this program, there is an opportunity for the public to comment on those applications, and that public comment process is ongoing. It closes on April 12th. And then the applicants have a couple of weeks to revise their proposals based on what they heard from the public comments, and that we will, again, post those publicly in terms of the revised proposals. We anticipate making an announcement of grant awards in early September with grant start dates in November. And then because these were funded with some federal funding, the grant completion date is actually the summer of 2026. So it's important that these grants, that we hit our marks, and I'm confident that we will, but the actual development of these projects will be fairly accelerated as well. I mentioned the community outreach, education, and engagement work. This is a fairly broad effort, including 3 additional members who are community liaisons operating across the state. But we also, through boilerplate that came out of our budget bill last year, are required to do 4 public hearings in the state, 1 in each of the 4 Court of Appeals districts, and specifically for the Court of Appeals districts that include Detroit and Grand Rapids in the cities of Detroit and Grand Rapids. We held our first hearing at Cass Tech High School last Monday, so that one was in Detroit. We combined it with a day of learning and meeting with some of our community partners in the city of Detroit and Highland Park, and really sort of got a lot out of hearing from folks and that public hearing was focused on implementation of the new laws. We'll hold a formal commission meeting in June 6th at the Eberhard Center in downtown Grand Rapids. And this is something that we have tried to get out of Lansing for some of our formal meetings. We held one formal commission meeting 2 years ago in the city of Detroit. We're going to the west side this time for our first formal commission meeting in Grand Rapids. We have a number of events that we're pulling together at the end of July and early August in the Upper Peninsula. That will also include a public hearing in the Upper Peninsula, and that will be focused on the UP energy study that I'll talk a little bit more about, but that was included in the 2023 energy legislation. And then finally, in late August, we'll be in the city of Flint for our 4th public hearing under the boilerplate language. So in terms of the implementation efforts, I know this is front of mind for a number of you, so I won't spend a lot of time detailing what was in the energy legislation that was passed in the fall, but it is shaping a fair amount of our work in 2024. And so I just wanted to sort of highlight a couple of the places where that is happening. But there's additional work around our integrated resource planning process, both in the considerations that we need to include, in some of the planning inputs that go into it, and then ultimately in the integration of the clean energy plans within the integrated resource planning framework. We also are bringing back standalone renewable energy plans, plan cases. We had those from 2008 to 2021. They are coming back under the legislation, and so that is creating some staffing changes and additional review. There's an expansion of the distributed generation program that was included, and so looking at our interconnection rules and some other places where that has changed commission processes. On energy waste reduction, there's an increased focus on that, and also the ability for utilities to file energy optimization programs or plans that include both energy waste reduction and efficient electrification. And then we also were given authority for the siting of some renewable energy facilities, larger wind, solar, and energy storage facilities, if ultimately the process at the local level does not result in approval. These also included a number of one-time projects, including a UP Energy study to look at the role of the reciprocating internal combustion engine units that were developed in the mid-2010s at the request of the state and have a direct relationship with the mining facilities up there. A study into the role of energy storage systems, a study that we need to launch by June 1st of this year into opportunities to improve our rate case processes, another proceeding that we need to launch also by June 1st around opportunities to increase public engagement in our work. Obviously, the framework of setting up sort of our siting process, we're doing this with a number of public meetings. We held our first last week to provide an opportunity for input and leverage the expertise of local governments, project developers, and others. And then a number of updated studies, and in the case of the electrification study, a new study that's called for under the energy legislation. So carrying out these new and expanded responsibilities will require increased staff capacity. This isn't the first time that we faced this. When the energy laws in 2008 were enacted, we saw an increase in responsibilities that were given to the commission and a corresponding increase in both budget and employees. Similarly, in 2016, when additional responsibilities were added to the commission, we saw corresponding increases in budget and employees, and the increases that were included in the governor's executive recommendation are consistent with what we've seen in those last two instances where significant energy legislation was enacted. And so this leads me to, I think, my last slide, but it sort of goes over the budget itself. So we're currently authorized for 195 FTEs. Our budget is capped at 192. And the governor's executive recommendation would increase our FTE number by 28 and would also catch up our budget to fully fund the current 195. This results in a total budget increase of just over $7 million. That includes $1.25 million for the mandated studies, so ultimately it's just under $6 million in ongoing funding that would be required. Again, the drivers of this budget request are increased staffing to implement the new laws, the new and accelerated studies, and then a budget realignment from the loss of federal funds. So under our gas safety program, we receive federal funding for implementation of that. We're allowed by law to be reimbursed at 80%. The typical number the usual number is typically in the mid-60s, and it's been as low as 55% reimbursement rate. And so that creates a gap between what we include and understand our budget to be based on the federal reimbursement rate and what is ultimately appropriated by federal regulators. So trying to close that gap to fund some of our gas safety. And again, as has been the case in the past, there is no general fund in this. It is largely a public utility assessment and then the federal funds for gas safety work. And with that, I'll close. I'm happy to take any questions on our budget, our work, or anything else, and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Commissioner Scripps. Members, any questions? Representative McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for being here. And before I begin, I just wanted to start by saying appreciate you coming to the district last year to do a town hall around affordability issues as well as reliability issues in our communities. And, you know, my community, as you heard, is continuously fed up of the power or the lack of power in their communities in terms of the reliability and the grid issues. Can you touch on, and you know my story a little bit. I have a 2-year-old as well and a newborn at home who was born on Valentine's Day. And my 2-year-old, when we first brought him home, you heard this story last year, we had a 4 or 5 day power outage. We had to spend all of that time in the hotel room. And we were worried again because it was some high winds during that Valentine's Day week that we were going to be without power. Literally, there's not a week that goes by. I just driven through communities in Macomb County and Warren and Sterling Heights as well. They were out of power last week. My southern part of my district in Detroit, I mean, they're out every week. And I'm so excited that you guys are putting together a reliability website because we need to see what's going on. And you're going to see the discrepancies and how my district is severely underperforming with grid reliability. What can you touch on a little bit more about what the commission can do? What can we do as well as legislators to empower you guys? I know we passed some recent legislation, but what are some other tools you guys can do to ensure that when we go back home, I just don't have to answer to my district, I have to answer to my wife when I get home. And, you know, it's really frustrating. Like I'm trying to stay content and, you know, but you know my issues, man. But can you touch on so the community can know, I can get back to them what's going on? What can the commission do? Because a lot of them are just, they revved up and they're just tired. So.
Yeah, it's I appreciate that some constituents maybe matter more than others in those instances. It's the frustration's real and it's justified. I mean, our performance isn't where it needs to be, and that's been something that I think has been clear and increasingly clear. I think it starts with data, and so we've spent a fair amount of time getting additional reporting from the utilities. Again, sharing it publicly in what I think will be an easy-to-use format, but also using that data to really sort of get under the hood and look at where the biggest problems are. And what's interesting is when you sort of really get into the details, you see that the number of outages isn't great, but it's not terrible. We're second quartile. We're sort of above average for both consumers and DTE. The duration of the outages, though, is really bad, and particularly the duration in storm events, that it takes far longer to restore power when it does go out, even if it goes out on average about the same as it does for other utilities, but it takes far longer, and it takes far, far longer when you get into storm events. And so really trying to focus on the pain points. And then I'll also say that when you look at their circuits, and you can sort of look at them across the whole of, I think Consumers has 2,400 circuits, DTE's got about 3,200 circuits. You see that a lot of them sort of perform right where they should, and then you get this tail, and that's where it falls off. And so you see sort of the number of people who experience multiple outages, what you're talking about, where it's not that you're getting sort of average performance. It's like this is the tail end of the reliability system, and you're seeing outages far more frequently than other people in the same system, and then other people in other utilities. And those are what drive people crazy. If it's going out once per year, which is actually where they're at in non-storm or across sort of all weather, and when you look at sort of storms, it's like 1.25 or 1.33 times per year. Those are okay, but when it's 8 times per year, and also when it goes out, it takes hours each time to respond, or days, that's what drives the frustration. So I think we've moved from a place where we were concerned about outages several years ago and did the usual work of having storm response orders and calling people together and say, how do we do better? And getting much more granular in our approach based on what we're going to see from the audit, based on really sort of getting into the details of the reliability metrics and understanding what are the biggest pain points, and then how do we draft our strategies, whether it's around what we're approving in rate cases, what we're including in the incentives and penalties docket that is trying to tie utility performance to the experience of their customers. How do we get much more granular around the places that are sort of showing up and driving the biggest amounts of frustration? And I think those are going to ultimately result in a system. And we've seen some improvement, I will say, that the tree trimming that we started authorizing for DTE in 2019 and a little more recently for consumers has helped to get them onto a better tree trim cycle, but we still have a ways to go. And ultimately, we're seeing that shows up in the overall numbers, but it hasn't really budged the storm numbers yet. And so I think we understand some of the pieces that are working and some of the places specifically where we've got more work to do.
Thank you for that, Chair. And just a couple, thank you, Chairman. Just a couple follow-ups. So I definitely understand where you're hitting on in terms of like non-storm times versus storm times. And just to paint the picture for everybody in the audience and who's listening, tuning in, you know, my son is now 25 months old, so 2 years and a month. And in that time span, we lost power in my community 18 times. Like 18 times. And so this is where my frustration is coming from. My community, like every time I have a coffee hour, they're livid. They're asking me like, what's going on? This is like the top issue in my district. And so I want to hammer to you guys, like whatever you guys can do, seriously, like let us know so I can get the resources to my community, because they're being told that, hey, you know, it's going to happen. They're going to do some, you know, potential bearing of the lines. And, you know, I know they're doing some pilot programs now with DTE in the area, but that's going to take time to implement. So in the meantime, folks are still going to have to suffer. I do want to follow up on the issue around affordability. This is really big in my community as well. People are spending more and more dollars of their income, I think upwards of close to a third on just utilities. And so can you touch on, I know you touched on the MEAP program that was put in place years ago, but what also the commission can do to try to curtail and make it more affordable for folks across Michigan?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief, but I'll highlight maybe 3 or 4 things. One is, I think we're cognizant of the impact of these increases. And if you look at the last 2 cases for DTE and similar for consumers, they've been below the rate, below or at the rate of inflation when looked at across the 2 of them. And so I think it's not something that is formal. It's not something, but I think we're cognizant of sort of where our rates are today and then also where they're going. Energy waste reduction is a great way of looking at this as well. When you look at our rates are high, but our bills are actually sort of in the average range, and in some cases significantly better than places adjacent to us, places like Ohio and Indiana that have lower rates but higher bills. And part of that is because we've been able to reduce overall consumption, and in the places who have adopted some of these energy efficient measures and practices, significantly reduce consumption. And I think that has been helpful as an affordability strategy as well. We're working among some of the work groups that I mentioned to try and tie some of those energy efficiency and energy waste reduction approaches with the affordability programs for long-term self-sufficiency. If we can ultimately help by reducing the bills through energy efficiency, then that's going to help avoid the need for assistance in the future. And then the assistance piece is something that we focus on pretty aggressively. I think we had to sharpen our pencils during the pandemic. We were in real danger of having a large segment of the population be financially challenged, and were. But I think it forced us to make our programs better, and we ultimately saw fewer people falling behind and the total amount of arrearages, the overdue bills, holding steady, which was not the experience of a lot of neighboring states. So I think that focus showed up in the data as well. And then the last thing that I'd say is for both consumers and DTE, we've explored percentage of income pilot programs. Those are still pilots and they're still pending, but they show promise, I think, for addressing the energy burden experienced by low income, where the same bill represents a much larger share of income for some of those individuals, and trying to understand what those programs might look like and whether there are opportunities for scale.
Thank you for that. And my next follow-up would be around the credits. So I know recently we increased the credits of outages from $25 to $35. I've had constituents call me who, when we have long-term power outages, that they're being told on the phone by our utility companies that these credits don't exist, that they never heard about this. And so I'm wondering, what can we do? And I know we had a instance where I provided a constituent to you, and you were able to do everything possible to ensure that she got her credits. But what can the commission do, or what are you guys are looking to do to make sure that those instances are being curtailed and mitigated? Because we're doing everything possible to lay everything in statute, but they're being told something else in our communities.
So I'd say two things. One is, one of the things that happened with the change in credits is that we made them automatic. And so before, customers would have to understand how long they were out, whether they met the criteria for getting a credit, and then contact their utility and request one. We've made them automatic under the changes in rules last year. And that's one of the elements that we're including on this new website. So you can actually see the amount of credits that are actually being paid out. And it's a significant increase in what we had before. There are, though, and I think this reflects the realities of the system, it's harder to restore people when 10% of the customers are out. And so there is a longer period before you're eligible for a credit in those sort of catastrophic storm events than on a typical blue sky day. We had one actually the day that I was in your district, where people were out, there was no reason for them to be out. Then it's a much shorter window in terms of how long you have to be out to be eligible for a credit. But again, the customer doesn't have to track that anymore. It is tracked, and the credits are made automatic. And then the last thing that I'd say is, if there are customers who think that the utility is not awarding them, making the automatic credit that they feel that they're eligible for, it's one of the places where Lucy and the other folks on our compliance and investigation team can help. They get a lot of calls. They can do what we did for your constituent, where they call into the utility, they understand, and if the utility's made a mistake, it can be corrected. Otherwise, they can get an explanation for your constituent in terms of, well, the credit threshold was actually this, and you were only out for a period of less than that. But that can actually help. Okay, there was some due diligence here. My complaint was heard and processed, and so they do a fantastic team. But we do a lot of that. I think we had 12,000 calls last year, and so I encourage you to sort of share our information with your constituents as well.
Thank you. And can I do one more?
If I can, we do
Okay,
have
I'm sorry.
We do have
I'm
a lot.
sorry.
I'll come
I know
back
it's
to
a
you.
lot.
Okay.
Okay.
Representative Morse.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I was happy to hear you talk briefly or mention weatherization and increasing energy efficiency in homes to reduce those energy bills for people. We also have seen, I do the HHS budget, money for pre-weatherization, so we could take advantage of those weatherization dollars that the federal government sends our way. So, and on the subject of federal dollars, I truly believe that it behooves us to bring as many of our tax dollars back to the state of Michigan as possible. So you mentioned on your 2023 priorities, seeking funding under the Inflation Reduction Act. Do you have any more details about how much funding we've requested, how much funding we've been awarded, any more details about how we're faring with that funding?
Yeah. There are a range of programs. I think there are 73 programs at the US DOE alone, and then there are others in other agencies at the federal government. The eligibility criteria differ, so sometimes it's only utilities that can apply, sometimes it's the state directly or the state on behalf of customers. And we've pushed in sort of each of those across a range of programs, both on the grants, and then there are a number of things through the Loan Programs Office where our utilities haven't submitted those, but we've encouraged them to be bold, and I believe that they will be. I think we're going to see some of the more aggressive proposals for funding to offset at least parts of the capital structure to the benefit of customers, and ultimately unlock additional reliability improvements as a result of that. But we've also been successful through things like the Grid Reliability Incentive Program, or GRIP. The consumers in particular and we've tried to create regulatory accounting approaches. I hope I'm not going to put anybody to sleep getting into regulatory accounting, but providing them a mechanism where they can track their costs. It's not a guarantee of recovery of those costs. We still obviously need to ensure that any expenses that would be charged to customers are reasonable and prudent. But it's a way of tracking those costs that gives them some degree of certainty, or at least a vehicle in their accounting systems to separate those out and to propose, if they are ultimately successful in getting the federal funding, for the match that would come from customers. But it helps to stretch some of those. In terms of specifics, I'm happy to get you a list. I'll share it with the full committee. But we have seen more success, I would say, than other states. When we go to regulatory conferences with our peers across the Midwest or across the country, we're regularly, the three of us, are asked, how are you doing this? And the truth is, we've got one person in our office who their whole job is to track this and to try and bring in as much federal funding as we possibly can, and we've been fairly successful at it.
Thank you, Chairman Skaggs, and thank you, Chairman Scripps, for your testimony today. And reading through your presentation, I see one of the one-time projects is citing compliance with PA 233. As we're all well aware, the Public Service Commission taking control of the citing and permitting processes. I was curious under what circumstances you could foresee the Public Service Commission denying a permit for a large-scale wind or solar development in rural communities in Michigan.
It's a great question. I know this is a controversial topic, so I appreciate the opportunity to address it. I think the law has a number of provisions in terms of setbacks, noise, and some other things that we would obviously need to review. And so things that fell outside of what's specifically specified in the law sort of is an obvious rejection. It also provides us some, I think, latitude in some other places. So in reviewing this, we have to look at whether there were sites within a community where the project could have been built on brownfields instead of using greenfields. It's required that we get an understanding of the prime farmland that might be used, and that comes from USDA as part of the application to us. And so understanding the impact on prime farmland and in places where specialty crops are grown in Michigan on specialty croplands as well. And I think if I could easily foresee places where we think that the impact on prime farmland is too great, that we're losing too much of it, and to have that be the basis of a denial. We're also required under the statute to consider not just the project that's directly in front of us in the application, but the cumulative amount of energy generation projects in a particular community. So I think if you're looking at one project sort of in isolation, you might say, well, it's just 100 megawatts or whatever. But if you know that there are 3 projects already operating and there's 2 more in the queue, I think you take a different view in terms of, are we overburdening this one particular community, even with private landowners that want to do it, but sort of putting too much in any one place? And so those are the places where I think we've got a fair degree of flexibility within the law, where it's specified that it's got to be part of our consideration, but particularly on alternatives on brownfields, the impact on prime farmland, and the cumulative impact of energy generation projects.
Okay, and thank you. And just to follow up on that, I also see rate case proceedings as this. I know that the Public Service Commission has recently approved some rate increases. Would you foresee, given the rewrite in our energy code that we saw last year, future rate increases coming forward for Michigan ratepayers?
So I think it's important that what is being proposed in our rate cases is largely around the distribution system. It's largely around reliability. There are some upgrades to the existing generation facilities that are being proposed as well. Some of those we've approved and seeing them as necessary. Others we've seen as not necessary and potentially avoidable if a plant were to retire or that sort of thing. And so, but 2/3, I would say, of the increases that we've seen in recent years have been tied to the distribution system and the sort of long-term capital and operations and maintenance tree trimming. I'm not allowed to call it vegetation management anymore. So, but it tied to sort of those distribution-based investments, and those aren't connected to the new law. I think we need to see what happens, but I will say that there are provisions in the the statute that was passed that allows us to extend the timelines for compliance, both with the renewable energy plans and ultimately with the clean energy plans, if it's unduly costly, if it poses a threat to resource adequacy, if it poses a threat to grid stability, and then if it gets bogged down because of supply chain issues, which we've obviously seen in the last couple of years. So I think it provides some degree of flexibility to make sure that we're not jeopardizing reliability or threatening affordability as we move towards these targets.
It had been about a year since I heard the term vegetation management, so I
think it was
appreciated hearing
me.
it again. Yep, it was.
Appreciate the correction.
Well, spring is upon us, so I think we're all going to be involved in some vegetation management ourselves. Representative Borton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chair Scripps. Appreciate your presentation today. My question is going to be similar to Rep. Schuette's. I live in northern Michigan, rural Michigan, and what I'm hearing from local government on pretty much a daily basis is they're concerned about the new process for wind and solar siting. And if I heard you right, the process is still going to start locally, and then if it reaches an impasse, that's when MPSC gets involved. If you could talk a little bit about how that process works, and then also how my local units of government are still going to have a say in the final outcome of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I also live in northern Michigan. I may be driving through your district later today, so I'll make sure to, exactly, yeah, stop by, fill up, get some food. So under the process that's included in the statute, the applications for a development project typically need to start locally, and I'll unpack typically as well. But they start with a meeting of the township supervisor or the chief elected official in the government, an explanation of what project the developer wants to propose, and then at that point, there's basically three things that can happen. If there's a moratorium in place, then sort of inherently there's not a compatible renewable energy ordinance. At that point, the developer can come to the state in the cases of a moratorium. If the local government at issue says, we'd prefer you go to the state, that's an option under this. And that was something that the townships asked for in the legislative negotiations. Not every local government wants this. In some cases, I think they're happy to have us do it. Otherwise, you start at the local level and you go through a process and you sort of work through the process that's available at the local level. I will tell you, I hope that all of them work at the local level. I'd rather not get a case and come back here and next year and say we want to give some of this money back. I don't know that that's going to happen, but ultimately that's how it's supposed to work. And the term compatible renewable energy ordinance isn't actually all that well defined in the statute. And I think some of it is to provide for a degree of flexibility to try and find a path that works at the local level. So it may be that the number of turbines or the setbacks or the noise levels are slightly different than the minimums in statute. But if a developer can work through that process with the local government and ultimately get to approval, that's a compatible renewable energy ordinance in my mind. It's only if after 4 months, if they get a rejection or after 4 months, subject to an extension of an additional 4 months, that they don't have an answer, that they can then apply to us. So it's not an automatic thing that it comes to us. The developer has to go through the local process, with the exceptions of the moratorium or where the township officials say, no, go to the commission. And then they can choose to go to us. So it's not a default thing. It's an option, an additional option available to them.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you,
And
Chair.
then, sorry, I didn't answer the second part of your question, but I think it's at least as important. So in a lot of our other siting processes, locals don't have a say. They can show up and intervene, but they have to sort of pass our typical intervention tests, and it's costly to do so. In these cases, there is much more of a local voice in the process at the commission process. So they have intervention by right, both the local unit of government and neighboring landowners. So they automatically get to participate in the case. And in cases where, in most cases, they also get the costs of their intervention, because it typically takes lawyers and experts to intervene in our cases, paid for up to $75,000 in a single township project, or $150,000 if it's more than a single township, paid for by the developer. And that's just a check that goes to the local government that they can use to then intervene in our cases. So again, it's not perfect, and there are places where we're going to come to a different conclusion than the local government. I imagine that will be the case. But I think the role of local governments and neighboring landowners is better protected in this framework than in any other place where we site energy infrastructure in Michigan.
Okay, thank you.
Representative DeBoer.
Thank you, Chair Skaggs and Chair Scripps. Last year, I think we talked about doing more tree trimming, which it sounds like you are working on that to help with reliability, and also with burying the cables. And I think you've done some of that as well.
Yes. So in the recent consumers' energy rate case that we approved a week ago Friday, we authorized the first year of a pilot to bury some of their lines. It's got to be part of the solution. I don't think it's a silver bullet. I don't think you can bury everything. But when you look at neighboring utilities in other states, they have more of their systems undergrounded. And so looking at where it is the best option, the most cost-effective option, I think has to be part of the menu of options, as well as tree trimming. Our cycles still are longer than other states. I think we've seen some improvement in those, and we've continued to approve the funds. It was a step up in the consumers case most recently, and then a continuation of the DTE surge program that was first approved in 2019, but a fair amount of focus on tree trimming, and we are seeing results from that. We just have a ways to go.
Yeah. I'm also wondering about, as we increase the amount of solar siting across the state, what is the anticipated amount of megawatts that you expect to add to the grid? Is there any kind of goal with that? Have we compared with other states that have added significant solar siting and increased their grid to a certain percentage? Or?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the comparisons. The numbers are in the law, so it's we're at a 15% renewable standard by 2021, and we've largely met that. It increases to 50% by 2030, and then 60% by 2035 for renewables. So that it's not necessarily wind or solar, but but those are the largest. Anticipated to be the largest components of that. Again, subject to some of the off ramps that I was described to Representative Schuette. But those are the numbers. It's a significant amount. I had it at my fingertips when I testified for the policy committees. I'll get it to you in terms of the impact on land use and total megawatts. But right now, I can give you percentages. I can give you megawatts after.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's go back for a second bite at the apple, and I appreciate your collegiality, Representative McKinney. Go ahead.
Thank you for your attitude,
leave me
Chair.
a few minutes here at the end so we can
Yes.
get out on
I mean,
time.
just one more question. And then the comment. So the comment would be, I appreciate you guys, and it was the work of the chairman too, that we created that boilerplate language for you guys to do the community outreach, and laying that out in statute and making sure that you guys are getting in the community and getting engaged. And I'm glad that you guys had, back in March 4th. As you can understand, I couldn't make it because I have a newborn at home. I wanted to. My wife was like, no, you got to come home. So I came home. But just wanted to point that out, appreciate you. I heard it went well. Community members have called me, and they're pleased about that. But my question would be, because you touched on multiple times, around kind of like the response, especially, when there's storms and things of that nature, the response to get the power back on. But in terms of the workforce and I guess the shortages, and, I've talked to utilities, they're bringing folks from out of state. What can we do in partnership with our unions to train more folks here in our state so we can, be pretty much man ready when there's, those storms, and getting our people back on pretty quickly?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I will say that so it was boilerplate last year. It was actually included in some of the 2023 statutory changes that we need to do for community meetings across the state. So I think it's an ongoing thing at this point, and we're excited about that. It gives us a chance to be out in the communities. In terms of the workforce development piece, I actually think that there's some interesting examples happening in the state of Michigan. So Representative Borton, in your district, Alpena Community College has been a leader on this. They've got a great facility that we had the opportunity to go and visit as part of a visit to Northeast Michigan earlier this year. Or I guess it was at the end of last year, but on both the tree trimming and on the line work that's necessary. In your district, or in the city of Detroit at least, on the west side, there is a partnership between DTE, IBEW, Focus Hope is offering wraparound services, really trying to get people from the community trained up to do some of this work. And DTE also has a partnership with the Parnell Correctional Facility in Jackson for returning citizens who are sort of within 6 months of parole. They actually have utility poles inside the correctional facility where they can start to understand what it is to sort of work at heights and to work, and the idea is to have a job waiting for them as they return to the community after serving their time. And so I think it's going to take a lot of apprenticeship programs, a lot of the different work, but also getting really creative with things like the project on the west side and the arrangement of groups that's involved in that, the correctional facility, and then leveraging the great work of our community colleges as well.
Thank you for that, Chair. And just to let you know, I'm on the corrections budget, and we were, touring various of our state prisons across the state, and we had the opportunity to tour Jackson and see that in full swing, seeing that training program in full swing. So I'm excited about it, but we need to do something about these power outages, man.
Agreed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative McKinney, and I just want to echo your gratitude and for your work on making sure that our constituents have the opportunity to meet with the commission, and Chair Scripps for your work to make sure that the commission is really out in the community and not just hunkered down in the safety and the bubble of Lansing. Also appreciate your work on the low carbon energy infrastructure development grants, as well as the renewable energy development grants. I'll be looking forward and encourage everyone to look at those entities that filled out their application and join in taking part in the public comment period that lasts here for another month. So, let your colleagues know who in their community might be interested in taking advantage of this. Obviously, I think it's something that is supportive and needed in the community. That's why we got 7 times the amount of applications than the money that we have available to us. So thank you all for your work on that in the last budget. Chairman Scripps, Dan, if I may, 2 quick questions here. Can you, and we can maybe do this in my office or over Zoom, go into a little bit more detail on the governor's recommended FTE requests?
Sure. So it's I think within the LARA budget, it's 31 individuals. I can do this from memory. One is connected with LARA's Financial and Administrative Services Division. That's for processing the increase in the Utility Consumer Participation Board funds that were included in the, so it was a one-time thing in the last budget. In the energy legislation that was passed, it's an ongoing significant increase, and those are grants that go to both the Attorney General and to nonprofits that intervene in our cases to represent the interests of residential customers. So a really important part of developing a strong record that focuses on the concerns, often affordability, but also reliability and sometimes other things of residential utility customers. There are 2 additional FTEs included in the LARA budget for the Michigan Office of Administrative Hearings and Rules. These are the administrative law judges that process our cases. And again, that is tied to what we expect to be an increase in the number of cases, the renewal of land cases, any citing cases that ultimately do come to the commission, the increase in sort of the range of issues that need to be considered, which just sort of expands the amount that any one judge has to consider in an individual proceeding. So 1 to FAS, 2 to more, to use the abbreviations, and then 28 to the commission. Those are across the commission. They include the creation of a new renewable energy section. For a number of years while processing renewable energy plan cases, we had a renewable energy section. As that has gone away, the focus has been more on the interconnection of distributed energy resources, and we may have been able to pull that back. But with the increase in the distributed generation program, it actually expands the work of that particular section, and so creates a need for a new renewable section. There are additional individuals in our resource optimization and certification section tied to the expanded range of considerations that need to be included in integrated resource planning cases, the additional studies that ultimately need to be performed in the accelerated studies, moving from 5 years to 4 years on some of the studies, and also the integration of the clean energy plans within the integrated resource planning framework. There are additions to the energy waste reduction section to focus on the opportunities for utilities to file not just energy waste reduction plans, but energy optimization plans that also include efficient electrification plans. So the sort of anticipated increase in work there is also reflected. We are in the process of creating or would be under this budget, in creating a siting section. Right now, the siting cases that we have are largely one-offs, so we expect 2 high voltage electric transmission line applications this year, but we haven't seen those in a number of years. We obviously got done with Enbridge and their Line 5 application to move the lines inside the proposed tunnel in December of last year, but again, that was a one-off. We have more regular siting applications that we continue to process through our Gas Safety and Operation Division tied to natural gas, but there wasn't necessarily a place where some of the renewable energy siting would necessarily live. So the goal, at least in the short term, is to create a section and to see if that's sufficient to handle the cases, and but ultimately having some flexibility there based on how many cases ultimately get filed. And then finally, all of this work also results in additional orders that we have to issue that are drafted by our attorneys. So within the commission office and our regulatory affairs division, the commission attorneys, some additional FTEs there to process the increased number of proceedings and orders that we'd have to issue.
Great, thanks. I would like to talk more about this,
Yep.
make sure I can fully understand
I
what you
can
got.
document where every single one of them was.
Excellent, I'm sure. Lastly, and then we'll pretend that the clock is a little fast, We've talked a little bit about energy waste reduction and energy efficiency. We've got several programs over several different departments. Where do you think we're being the most effective at our bang for the buck on existing programs?
Our utility programs are some of the best in the country. The American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy ranks sort of utility programs, and we're third out of the 50 states at this point. And we've seen significant savings as a result. We still see about $3 in savings across the system level for every dollar that's invested in those programs. That has, in our estimation, saved about 2,000 megawatts of needed capacity on an annual basis. That's 2 new billion-dollar natural gas plants. So it is significant in terms of the savings that we've seen from these programs. It's one of the reasons that even though our rates are higher than the average, our bills are actually below average. And I think that's something that continues to be beneficial. So our utility programs are really strong. We've also seen through a number of intervening parties with a real focus on this, some of what I would consider the best programs in the country focused on the specific needs of low-income customers. And this has really been, I think, a place of creativity, which is not something you often hear regulators speak about. They're often arrived at as settlements between the utilities, so I want to give credit there too. But those settlements may go further than what we would be able to do if we were simply adjudicating the case in a typical fashion and issuing an order at the end of it. But I think you've seen significant buy-in and significant program development and delivery focused at low-income customers. So I would highlight those two, the overall energy efficiency programs and then the focus on low-income customers in particular. And I would say there were increases in the efficiency programs in the recent legislation. I think those are important on both the gas side and the electric side, and a requirement for a minimum amount of spending focused at low-income customers. But I think our success even before that shows that the current framework that includes statutory minimums, incentives for utilities in terms of cost-sharing approaches for them to go above and beyond what's the minimum required in statute, and then an overarching planning framework, at least on the electric side, that considers demand-side resources like energy efficiency on a level playing field with additional investments in generation. I think they've been able to develop or deliver, again, some of the best programs in the country.
So, members, we will be in touch with you about the future schedule. In the meantime, we are expecting to get some information from Chair Whitwer shortly. So please send me your input, your comments, your desires, so that I can begin to pass those along to her as she sets some of the parameters for us here on this subcommittee, and we can try to have as much flexibility in those parameters as we can possibly get. With that, there being no further business before the subcommittee, we are adjourned.